Okay, so yesterday, if you listen to the share, Reish Lakish had stated that a person who places his hands inside the Kodesh, inside the Azara, gets Malchus because he holds Bia b'migdish Shma Bia. If you bring a little bit inside, it's Shma Bia, it's considering counting. So yesterday I had a chavrusa on Shia Nasan Nomin. Me and Reb Nasan, we discussed that what happens if you're Mitzvah and the Mitzvah has a heta to put his fingers in on the eighth day of his processing. He brings his carbon ashram. He's got to put his toe, his ear, and his finger in to get some blood, shemen and blood put on it. And what happens that day? He happens to be a Balkari. That day he happens to be a Balkari. And that night is Pesach. And that night is Pesach. So we wanted to say there's a mitzvah asay, a carbon Pesach, which carries it with Chiyav Karis, and a mitzvah asay to be sholeach from all the machnas, so a Tful Yoim should not be a machna levia. But okay? And so the asay of Karis would be docha the asay of being sent out of machna levia. The bottom line is, the Gemara asked, how in the world, if you, Reish Lakish, hold Bia b'mikzis Shma Bia, good that Tful Yom can be a Machna Levia, he can't be a Machna Shechina, and sticking your hands in the Azara, you're sticking hands into Machna Shechina. So how can you tell me, Bia b'mikzis Shma Bia? Azay frag the Gemara. Efrit Ula Gaval the Geteretz. Mitoich shel Chutroi, the Mitzayra, Chutra the Tful Yom. The Mitzvah is Mechusik Purim. He's also not allowed to stick his hands in. But the Torah says he could. Mitoich shel Chutra, the Mitzvah to stick his hands in, right? It's mutter for the Tful Yom to stick his hands in, even though Bia b'migzis Shma Bia. That's where we're holding right now. We're now going to extend that concept of, since I was this, Mitoich this will include something else, right? Mitoich this will include something else. Now, let's say, Roiv of the Tzibor are Tamei Tumas Zav. Roiv is Tumei Zav. Do they bring the carbon Pesach with Tumah? And of course, you all know the answer is no. Of course, you all know that, right? Really, the Tumah that the Tumah that is Tamis Meis. If Roiv of the Tzibor is Tamei Tumas Meis, then it's Hotcha, and you bring Pesach Rishon. If it's Roiv Tzibor Zavim, then you're going to bring Pesach Sheni. It's not going to go after the Tzibor. Now, what happens if Roiv of the Tzibor are Zavim, and then Punkt, Roiv of the Tzibor comes Erev Pesach, they now what? They're now Tamei Tumas Meis. So we want to Sushtel Ulis Cheshbon over here. Just like Ula said, Mitoich it's Hutta for the Tzaras, it's Mutta for the Tful Yoim. Hu Adin Mitoich it's Mutta for the Tamei Meis, Hutcha for the Zav. That's the Gemara's flow. That's what's going. Excuse the pun, but that's the Gemara's. That's the Gemara's flow. Says the Gemara. So we're starting on Lamed Beis Amid Beis. Lamed Beis Amid Beis. Rav Yosef 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, about 14 lines up. Rav Yosef. Kesava Ula, who's of the opinion that mitoich it's muta for the mitzayra, it's muta for the full yain, right? Would also hold Reuben Zavim if the majority of Klal Yisrael are Erev Pesach Zavim. V'nasu Tumei Mesim, and then they become Tumei Mesim. Hoyel v'huchul tumasan, since it's mutter to bring the carbon Pesach b'tuma, huchul zivasan, it'll be mutter for the ziva also. Okay. Amalei Abaya said Abaya to Rabbi Yosef, me dummy. How's that comparable? L'tumasan, hutra Amalei Abaya me dummy. Tuma ishtari. Ziva lo ishtari, Tuma, it's muta for him. Tuma ishtari, Rashi, Sheba achreina, Ziva rishayna, oimedes, b'mkoima. V'lei dami l'mitzayra. The hasam ikalamema, migu de kamaisa le havi yisirale, basraisa le yachmir lecha mikamaisa. Fellas, look at me. What was the case? He was a mitzayra, and then he became a tful yoim. He had the heta for mitzayra right then and there. Since he had the heta for the mitzayra, and it's followed by tful yoim, memela, this is nichnas over here. Over here, he's a zav. There's no heta for a zav. The heta comes afterwards. So you don't say hutra for the zav. He already had a shame zav. Bishleim, if you would have said he was hutra l'tamei tumas meis, and then they became a zav, then you'd be talking ulas. But you're telling me first he was a zav? right? That's the same thing saying first he's a full yom and then he's a mitzayra. Right. Okay, so that's no, so therefore it's not comparable to Ula. You're telling me, Rabbi Yosef, mitoich Ula, you hear this din? Says Abaye, there is no mitoich over here. By Ula's din, first he was a heta mitzayra, to masa ishtari, and the mele ishtari wat full yoim. Over here there was no ishtari, he was a zav, there was no nitcha right there. So that's the lashon of the Gemara. Midami, tuma ishtari, tuma by tuma meaning by mitzayra, it was muta. Ziva la yishtari. Ziva by Karban Pesach wasn't mutter to be nitcha. Amalei, Rabbi Yosef commented back to Abaya, Dilma hachi kamar. Perhaps, in other words, I think this is Abaya talking. Perhaps Abaya is reminding Rabbi Yosef, right? The Bach says Amalei in, Amalei. In, he says lashon of in, it's mashma that what? That it's still it's not Abaya talking. It's Rabbi Yosef. It's Rabbi Yosef talking, right? In other words, I could have learned the Gemara. Abaya is reminding Rabbi Yosef who was sick, and then you would switch the order around, guys. You would say Mace and then Zav. That would be comparable, correct? So now he's saying Amalei. Rabbi Yosef says Dil Mahachi Kamar Mar Rubin Tameyin Mesim. If Roy Vatamei Tumas Mace become Pesach. Nasu Zavim, and then they become Zavim. Hoyel v'huchel tumasan for the tumas mace. Huchel is zivasan. The mutta for what? For the ziva. The mutta for the zav. Guys, good. Amalei in. So Abaya said l'chayra in. That would be correct. Okay. Or maybe the opposite. You know what? It could. Again, I'm not sure. It could be Abaya telling him, and he's reminding in. But you got the flow of the Gemara. That there's chilik between if just like Mitzorah came first, you would need Mace to come first, right? So Amalei in Vakati Loidami, but it's not comparable. Mitzorah had Teruhu Hoyel v'Ishtri Tuma Dechuyehi Laha Itchoy Laha Lo Itchoy. Throughout Shas, we have the concept, fellas, of Hutra or Hutcha. Hutra means it's Mutagama. Hutcha means B'di'eved, you could do it, but when we say by Karban Pesach that Tamei Mace, it doesn't mean Chutra B'tzibur, it's Chutcha B'tzibur. By Mitzayra, it's not Chutcha that he can stick his hands in. The Torah says you stick your hands in. It's Mutta completely. So how can you compare Mitzayra, which is Mutta completely, therefore could Mata Tful Yoim, versus you're telling me B'di'eved, Tamei Mace is Pesach Sheni because it's Hutcha. Now you're going to be Matcha Zav also. So it's not comparable. Even if the order is correct, that Mace came before Zav, still the heter of Mace is not a heter. It's a Hutcha. So I would say it's Hutcha for Mace, but it's not Hutcha for Zav. And therefore we want to say that it's not comparable. Right? Then we want to say it's not comparable. The Lashon of the Gemara. Laha Itchai, for Mace it was Hutcha, right? And Laha Lo Yitchai. But for Zav, it wasn't. Amalei Rava Adraba. Ifchem Istabra. I could tell you Chutcha is more of a reason to be included. Mitzayra Heteruhu Laha Ishtari Ulaha Ishtari. Tuma Dechuyahu Mali Chad Dechuyah Mali Shtei Dechuyahs. In other words, there are different concepts over here. I can learn a Chutcha as a Kula, I can learn it as a Chumrah. Guys, if you're going to learn it as a Chumrah, so it's Mutta only for itself, mutcha for itself, but not for something else. If you can learn it for a kula, you know what? Mitzayra, mutta completely. Tful yoim, I don't have any heta for tful yoim. Hutcha, I have a hutcha for Mitzayra. I'll have a hutcha for Zav also. In other words, says a Rabbi to Abaya, I can go the other way also. I can learn it as a kula. Since we're makel, go ahead and say that it's hutcha by Mace. I'll say it's hutcha by Zav also. I'll say it's like also. So you're not locked into any. You're locked into one thing, that the tumah of Mace had to take place before the tumah of Zav. That you are locked into. That Zav before, it doesn't seem anyone argues that that's not going to work. Because just like Mitzayra was first and Tful Yom was second, the question is it comparable? On one hand, I could tell you, well, it's comparable because this is mutter, this is mutter. On the other hand, I could tell you, no. I could tell you it's hutcha for this and not for that. Or I could say, no, it's hutcha and therefore it's hutcha for both. Okay. Now, Michlal, the Machlokes in Abaye v'Rava. What do you hear from both of them? The Shavayu Svirle Tumba Dechuya Hi B'Tzibur. Again, from there, guys, they both use the lashon of the chuya. Both Abaye and Rava said, hey, how can you matter it? This is ducha. In other words, it's doicha. And Rashi tells you here, guys, the lashon of the chuya. Look at Rashi. Very nice Rashi to know. Kloimar. B'koishi nitches etzla. Dichui ba'alma al yedei nisias avain hatzitz. Meratze. V'loi behet the goma l'tumas meis itchi v'loi l'tumas ziva. In other words, why does it work? There's such a bria in the world called the tzitz. The tzitz has the capacity to be meratza on certain things. One of the things that can be meratza on is tumas meis. That if the tzibur brings tumas meis, it can be meratza. But mehechetesa ziva. In other words, b'koishi. What is b'koishi? B'koishi, I'm going to allow this. I'm not going to extend it even more. B'koishi, I would like meis to be overthrown. But ziva, that I don't hear. So therefore, Rashi tells you they both Raya and Rava, they hold that tum is the chuy b'tziva. And you know what Rashi says? V'nafkaminu mahavi mandam perikamid yuma diyamu hutra hi b'tziva yochid b'makam rabim. And there is a sugya, a moira in Masechta Yuma. It says tuma hutra b'tziva. So in other words, what Rashi is bavarning, so big spitz that they both hold. Okay, so both nu as vas. As Vas is there's a Rabbim Vacha Yachid. Since there's a Yachid that says Tuma Hutra B'Tzibor, he's a Yachid Eitzel Abaye v'Rava. So Rashi's telling you an Afkamina and Halacha between the two. Leima Messiah Le. Now, it's amazing. When I was on the plane, I just gave this big shmechel. I would say Leima Messiah Le that Tuma's Hutra B'Tzibor, right? That would be the flow, yes? That Tuma's Hutra B'Tzibor and you're being Yeraya to Rav and Abaya. Sag the Helig Rashi, Leima Messiah Le. Lu'ula da'ama bias b'migdash mabiyah. Rashi takes you back. Rashi gets you back on track. It's unbelievable. You know, Rashi's taking us back to the beginning of Lamed Beis Amid Aleph. That biyah b'migdash mabiyah. It's gavaldik. Rashi is. I just smile because I'm so, you know, from by now, I'm so into the metacognitive part of learning, the process of it. How Rashi knew, see, 1,000 years later, there's going to be a guy sitting on a plane who wouldn't know what he's talking about unless you put him back in the straight path. It's great. So we're speaking about what? Okay, where's the raya? All the smichas that took place in the Beis Hamikdash, being samech on the animal, is Kair Aleim ani takef l'smicha shchita. I'll say immediately after smicha, it says v'samach v'shachat. You should do shchita v'samach v'shachat. Chutz mizu, with the exception of the Asher Mitzayra, shahaisa v'shar niknar. It was in Shar Niknar. She'em Mitzayra yachal ikanis l'sham. He couldn't go into that place. At shemezin alav midam chatasai umidam hashamai, and it doesn't mean spitzed upon him. It means putting on his fingers and his ears and his toe. V'i amit bia b'mikzas leishma bia la'ayel yadei v'lismeich. Right, guys, watch. You're telling me the following. Look at me. You're telling me the following. Every other carbon you have smicha and take of the smicha shchita. The mitzayr is asham, right? What would it make sense to do? Bring it all the way up. I really should have had a chart. I really should have had a chart. I'm going to just. Guys, you can see this? You can see this? Watch. This is over here. This is Shar Niknar over here. This is Shar Niknar over here. The Mitzayra would come here. This place wasn't Kodesh because they allowed the Mitzayra to come over here. It didn't have the Kedusha of the Azara, even though you had Pishpishim inside did. He would come here, he would stick his hand in, his ear and his foot. Okay? Now, you wouldn't be able to do smicha over here. You know why? Because if you hold bia b'miktzis shma bia, you should be able to bring the carbon over here and stick your hands in. In other words, if you bring the carbon to 21, fellas, you would be able to stick your hands in, since bia b'miktzis loy shma bia. So why would you tell me that what? that there's no smicha by the mitzaira, it's possible to do smicha by the mitzaira. Bring it over here, stick your hands on it, and geschmack. Ella, what's the answer? You can't stick your hands on it. Now, I will tell you the following. Do you remember? I'm sure you do. We had a machloikis what safan is, fellas. We had a 3-year machloikis. We had Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda saying, guys, look, only opposite over here, Yerech Mizbeach. We had Rabbi Lozer, Rabbi Shimon saying, Ulam Mizbeach. And we had Rebbe saying, Afilu over here. It could be that this would only work according to Rebbe, because you need north, you need soften for an ashram. It would only work according to Rebbe. According to Rebbe, 21 is north. According to the other Tanaim, it's not north. So in other words, there's an other factor over here. Ken zayin bia b'migdash shma bia. Eleish lo shma bia. You would be able to put your hands in here, but you don't have an animal there because it's not the north. Guys, you understand from the picture? It's good, right? You can't get an animal over here. You cannot get an animal over there. That might be the other problem. I'm glad I wasted the time to do that. Not a waste. I'm glad I spent the time doing it. Okay, says the Gemara. So we want to blame a Messiah. We're going to bring a proof that what? Kol ha-smicha shehayu sham 3 lines down. Koyer aleim ani taketh the smicha shchiti. Ruthie called the landlord. Chutz mizu shehayu shebashar niknar. Sheim mitzor yachal likonis l'sham. At shemezen lov midam chatas midam hashamay. V'yamit bia b'mixas leishma bia layel yadev lismay. Go ahead, put your hands in and do smicha. So Amar Rabbi Yosef said, Rabbi Yosef, Hamani, who's the Tana of the Kol ha-smichos shayu sham? It's Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, who holds the north is only opposite the Mizbeach. The Amar Marchik Tzafoin, right? That Tzafoin is Marchik, it's a distance. So again, here Tzafin would be over here, guys. So there's no way a person can stick his hands in from over here all the way to over here. That's only Tzafin. The Gemara asks the Kasha, says, I go over here, look, why don't you make a little window over here, have a mitzvah come to this area, stick his hands here, do smicha over here, and do shchita, then it'll be opposite the north. If that's your problem, is getting the animal into the north, look, this is the north, right? This isn't the north. Over here, this part is not the north, right? But this part where you see the hooks and the rings, this is the north. So look, this is outside the base, outside the Azara. Look at the pointer, where the pointer is. Make a little. You don't see the pointer over here, Nasim? Look to the right. Can you see it now? Okay. Put a little window over here, like you have a pish space over here. Let him stand over here. If bia b'migdus is loishma bia, stick the animal over here. You'd have smicha and you'd have the north. Good. Oh, says the Gemara. So Fred the Gemara kasha. Fred the Gemara kasha. Why don't we do the following? Ula'avet pishpeish, make a little window over there, and therefore you could take it the shmicha shchita, because both Abai and Rava hold that Dami Chavayu Hakol b'ksav miyad Hashem alai haskil. David HaMelech writes everything is right. Kol malacha hatavnis, all the malacha of the tavnis of the Mishkan was given over to David, so therefore you can't add anything. In other words, this is not part of the blueprint, guys. This wasn't part of the blueprint. Since it's not part of the blueprint, okay? So we wanted to bring a raya. We wanted to bring a raya that bia b'migdash shma bia, right? Or else, why don't you put your hands in there? And the answer is you have no raya, because that time of that price is Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. So it's a physical impossibility to do it. But enoch inami bia b'migdash shma bia loy shma bia. So you have no raya to ula. You have no raya to ula. Okay, geschmack. Anyway, the smicha roishev ruboy machnis. Fellas, smicha is not like this, putting your hands on. You got to put with all your might. So sticking your hands in, even if you can hold bia b'migdis loishma bia, your hands are not enough. You're gonna have to put your whole body in, and everyone holds your body is shma bia. So Ken's like, in other words, another mission is just kind raya. You have no raya from over here because das heish is kein smicha. It's not a good smicha because you can't get your body in there, and since you can't get your body in there, so therefore you have no raya.
Laser smicha ma'akev. You don't do it.
Oh,
okay.
My timer.
But wait, isn't there machlokas whether you need smicha carved shchita? So
Yeah.
maybe that's outside already.
This is going on. That the one that holds. We can see a little bit in the Gemara, a little Vaita. But right now, I think it's a beautiful setup. I like the way you come out from left field with the mizbeach as it's sad. You know, you don't think about it gives you a nice surah of what's going on over here. I can't do it. But meanwhile, you have no raya. That we destroyed the raya of Lema Messiah of the Gemara. They wanted to bring a raya to Ula. It's not a raya. Okay, now. My time, what's the reason you have to be Rosh Verubayin? What's the reason? Kol koichavin and hilkach layevsha. Therefore, it's not possible. It's not possible to go ahead and do smicha because you need your whole body in there. Now the Gemara wants to know myself. Rabbi Yosef hold. Okay, this is what Benji just put up. Ikasavar smichas osha mitzoyre deraisa. V'teikif l'smicha shchita deraisa. In other words, they're both right. La'ayov v'lismach lehedya derachmana amar. In other words, one second. You're telling me smichas deraisa, guys? You're telling me that smichas on a asham deraisa. What's your problem? God told you to do it. What's your problem? Guys, forget. Going back to yesterday's Gemara, does a Mitzorah stick his hands in? Is there an opinion that bia b'mikzah shma bia? What's the answer? It's mutter. That's it. So Memela the same thing over here. If you need smicha for the asham and you need teichel the smicha shchita, so Hashem told you to do it. There's no problem. What? The guy who makes the rules play the game. That's the way it goes, right? That's the way it goes. So Amar Rav Adavar Masna ki zeir Shem yabib psiyos. Wow, this is great. You just told me what? You can go in, yeah? You're not sticking your hands in. You're going in. You know what you're worried about? You might walk a little more. The heter is what? The heter is enachinami midoraisa. You would be Mitzvah would be able to go in, and he'd be able to say because he's all in. But guess what? Anything more than that, he's over on the Sakaris. Anything over that, he's over the Sakaris. He's in the Azara. So when Mela Gzeir Shem Yarbe Psiyos, Rashi. Shem Yarbe Psiyos, Liacha Shesamach. After he does smicha, in Yichnes Psiyel et Sad Pnim, he was going to go one step closer to the Mizbeach. Yosim Mishahayish Tzarich, Nimtza Einish Karis. Rashi's Lashon Zav Shal Rashi. Beautiful. Guys, Geschmack is anything. Geschmack. Amar Rav Abba Bar Masna, Smichas Osha Mitzoyra de Araisa, Taka is the Araisa, V'teikif l'smicha shchita lav de Araisa. Okay, so to do smicha is the Araisa, but to do shchita afterwards, no, this is not. Okay, Rashi, teikif l'shchita lav de Araisa, d'lei mashmalei v'samach v'shachat. In other words, where's the whole takeoff the shchita? It's the juxtaposition of the pasuk. It says v'shachat v'samach v'shachat b'makam shesamach yishchait. It's not mashma like the hymn. Fred the Gemara Meisevei v'samach mishachat masmicha b'tahorin af shchita b'tahorin. Now you're telling me that just like shchita has to be masmicha is b'tahorin and not tameim. The smicha has to be in the azara because teichik l'shmita is shchita, right? The tummy, however, can't go into the azara, and he can't even put his hands in the azara. Therefore, because he has to be called koichai, av shchita b'tahirin, vi amit lav midaraisa. If you're going to tell me smicha is not the raisa, b'tamei nami mishkachas la. You know what, guys? If you're telling me that smicha is not the raisa, right? So why don't you do smicha outside? Bring the animal outside, do smicha, and then do it in. Let the animal go outside and let him go in. Let's see Rashi, guys. Meisvei samach v'shachat. Haide samchinu kra lahakesha samchinan. They put the samach v'shachat next to each other for a hekesh. Kidamrinan mas smicha b'tahirin av shchita b'tahirin. Usmicha de b'shita lan ba mishum dechsif l'fnei Hashem. And it says with Samach Lefnei Hashem. B'shchita, it says by Samach Lefnei Hashem by Shchita. That Tzricha Shetehei Lefnim. Umishim V'teikif L'smicha Shchita Sarach Sheyichnois HaSamach Lefnim. In other words, I know shchita has to be inside. It says Lefnei Hashem. If you're telling me smicha has to be taken the smicha shchita, the whole heta to go in is for the shchita, right? Continues Rashi. V'lamoid tamei mi mechutz. Let the tamei go head outside. Put his hands on the animal that's alive. For lismach b'fnim. Yeah, sure. You can't do it inside. Can min el shavoishav ruba machnis. V'amid lav deraisa. Hechi pshitlan that smicha b'tahayrin. It can even be tameyin. In other words, Bishlam, you tell me the Raisa, guys, watch. If you tell me the Raisa, Bishlam, you tell me the Raisa, there's no way in the world we can do it. But if you tell me it's not the Raisa, then it's not B'tahoyrin, it can be B'tameyin. How could you do Smicha B'tameyin? Bring the animal out, he'll stick his hands on the animal's a Baal Chai, it's not Makabel Tumah, then the animal goes inside, the Shchita, Gavaldig. So it must be that what? That take of the Shchita, or else you couldn't possibly say, Ma Shchita B'tahoyrin, Av Smicha B'tahoyrin. That's why I read the Gemara. He'll find smicha by tamei and by doing it outside the azara. Ela epich, it's the opposite. Smichas ashim mitzayra lav daraisa. The smicha is not the araisa. If it taketh l'smicha shchita is the araisa, right? And why? Rashi says ksava ashim mitzayra lav daraisa. Ksava she'ena b'chal hashamois. Why is an ashim mitzayra different than all the other hashamois? She'ena bo'el lahachshir. It's a shtickle like the Nazir. Asham Ilis, did I do an Aveira? Asham Gazela, did I do an Aveira? Asham Shifcha Charufa, did I do an Aveira? Asham Nazir, people say you did an Aveira, right? But you're an Aveira that you Makabal Naziris. The Torah asks other things on yourself. But Asham Mitzayra is just the process to machshir you to be kosher guy to come in. So maybe it's different than any other thing. That's why it's not the raisa. Therefore, we say that the smicha of the asham is lav the raisa, and teikus is the raisa. Okay. Now the Gemara is going back. Rashi does it again. Ravina Amar Tap Rashi. Had Amar Ula Leel Mishmei Reish Lakish Bebiya B'Miktsas. Rashi brings us back inside. Again, every time you go to a dialogue, Rashi is going to bring you back. It's Gavaldish. Ravina Amar Le'inyan Malkus. Ravina said, guys, Le'inyan Malkus. What does it mean, Le'inyan Malkus? Let's go back to Lamed Beis Amid Beis at the top. Lamed Beis Amid Beis at the top. Amar Reish Lakish. Amar Ula Amar Reish Lakish. About 7-8 lines down. Amar Ula Amar Reish Lakish. Tamei Shehichnes Yada Lefnim Loika. Now we thought it was Le'inyan Malkus. And he's saying, no, it's Le'inyan, we thought it's Le'inyan Karis. It's not Le'inyan Karis, it's Le'inyan Malkus. Rashi, by us, back by us. Le'inyan Malkus, Amra, Kidama, like it said on the Amid Beis. Avalai Le'inyan Karis. But we're not speaking Le'inyan Karis, the Toisvei that you should ask, Mitzoyre Shirah Keri. The Chi Ishkis Bia Linegia, Las Hare Ishkis. The whole Hekish was a warning for Malkus. Kidachsiv, like Savai. There's no einish by touching. How did we get to the bia b'miktsas? What led us to that? So look back at Lamed Beis, guys. Look back at Lamed Beis. Find it hard, like when we need to do the Gemara together, so I don't know who looked and didn't. It's hard to tell. Ama'ula. Let's see. Ama'ula and Reish Lakish. Tamei sheichnas yadei lifnim, loika shenemar b'chol kodesh leisiga. It says that what? B'chol kodesh, you should not go ahead what? And touch. Ve'lamigdash leisavai. And you should not come what? Into the base of Migdash. Ma negia b'miktzah shma negia. Af b'ya b'miktzah shma. Now, fellas. So if you touch something that's tamei, the whole thing's tamei. If I put my hands in, I'm also tamei. That's the source. Guys, if you go ahead and touch nevela, chayv misa, chayv karis. If you eat, that's nevela, chaylev. If you eat chaylev, you chayv karis. If you touch chaylev, you're not. So the raya, the hekesh is geschmack. Your whole raya, that bia b'migdash shma bia, is from just like negia. It's compared to negia. Negia doesn't have a chiyuv karis with it. Memela, that's what I meant when you stick your hands in. And therefore, what are you asking me from Mitzayra? That Mitzayra walks in, he's in full yoim, he's speaking about a tummy that's nichlas ne'azara. Merednish vegen das. We're not speaking about karis at all. That's what Ravina says. Let's see it inside. Ravina amalon inyan malchus itmar. Kiyasa Ravin amar Rabba vahol inyan tamei shenaga b'kodesh itmar. It wasn't even speaking about putting your hands into. It was, again, according to the first Pshat and Ravina, it's speaking about putting your hands in. No, you know what he said it? He said it regarding a tummy that touches Kodesh. Rashi. The tummy shenaga b'kodesh itmar. Lo yolef reish lakish malchus me'ahukra. El tummy shenaga b'kodesh. Lo ari b'bias mikdash klal. He's not speaking about going into the base of Mikdash at all. He's speaking about a tummy that touches Kodesh. The itmar. Tummy shenaga b'kodesh. A person that's tummy that touches Kodesh. Reish lakish shama like it. Reish lakish says you get malchus just for the act of touching. Rabbi Yochanan ain't like it. Reish lakish shama like it. B'chol Kodesh lo yisiga. The pasuk says, "B'chol kodesh lo yisiga." It's a lav, and it's a ma'isa. A lav, it's a ma'isa. You touched it. Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan ain't like it. Says Rabbi Yochanan ain't like it. You don't get malchus. Why? Hahu b'truma ksiv. When it says the pasuk "B'chol kodesh lo yisiga," you know what kodesh was speaking about? We're not speaking about kachim. We're speaking about truma. We're speaking about truma. Right? Okay, there's a very long Rashi over here. Reish Lakish haikra lahachi da'asa. Afraid the Gemara, Reish Lakish uses B'chol Kodesh L'Siga to tell me you get malchus for touching kachim. He needs it for something else. What does he need it for? That if you eat Basar Kodesh and your tummy, he needs a source for eating Basar Kodesh of your tummy. B'chol Kodesh L'Siga is speaking about achila. It's not speaking about negia. Didmar. Where does the Torah warn you that if you're tummy and you're eating kachim, it's right? Where do you know that from? So the Gemara's kasher is, if he needs the pasuk for this, how does he have it to teach me that what? That you can't touch kachim when you're tummy. That's what he used it for, right? Just that negia, that if you're tummy, you touch it, right? You shouldn't touch it. But I need it for achila, I don't need it for negia. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Tani Bargla, he learned in the name of the Tana Bargla, Asya Tumasai, Mibias Migdash. He learns out of Gezer Shava, Tuma. It says, Bekaris, Ba'oichel, Bekaidish, it says, Bitumas Haguf, Bitumas Alav, Uksib Bias Migdash, it says, Oi Tumas Boy. So, Mala Haloin Einish V'Hiser, just like coming in, eating it, Afkan Einish V'Hiser, so just like going in, so to eating. The his Tamei Shinaga Bekaidish, Mid Afgar Achmana Balash and Negia. Okay, so the Gemara now is concluding Reish Lakish l'chayra. He needs b'chol kodesh l'siga to teach me an issa achila, that it's asa to an ashara to eat it, that it's asa to eat it, right? And he can't use it to tell me a warning about touching it, right? Because he needs it for this. Rabbi Yochanan, on the other hand, he has a gzeir shavu tumasai. Eating kachim from going into the base of Mikdash. Just like going into the base of Mikdash when you're tamei, there's an ashara and achila, so too eating. So bottom line is, guys, you got a kasha on Reish Lakish. How can he tell me he uses it to touch kodesh? I use it for eating kodesh when you're tamei. So that the Gemara answers, tamei shenaga b'kodesh mida afgei rachmana b'loshen negia. Right? V'ashara lo oichel mida ishkis kodesh l'mikdash. So he has a loshin and he has a hekesh. When the Torah says b'chol kodesh lo yisiga, right? That teaches me what? You shouldn't touch it. And in eating, it says, when it says the kodesh lemigdash, b'chol kodesh lo yisiga ve'el migdash lo yisavai. He has a hekesh, guys. Look at the pasuk. B'shleishim yom shleishis yom teishay b'nei v'hara b'chol kodesh lo yisiga ve'el migdash lo yisavai. B'chol kodesh lo yisiga teaches me negia. Ve'el migdash lo yisavai teaches me achila. When the ishkis kodesh lemigdash, right? Just like going into the base of Migdash, it's asa and has karis. So too what? The issa so too it's asa. If you go ahead and eat kachim, you're going to have a chiyuv of karis. And the issa of touching it is from the first part of the pasuk. That's the Tanya Kavasi Reish Lakish. Now we have a brisa raya Reish Lakish. Again, what's the raya? B'chol kodesh leisiga is negia. Kodesh and Migdash is that you have the hekish. B'chol kodesh leisiga Tanya Kavasi Reish Lakish. B'chol kodesh leisiga ashar lo oichel. Ata oima ashar lo oichel el ein el negia. Tamalim b'chol kodesh leisiga. V'el Migdash leisavai. Makish kodesh leMigdash. Ma Migdash davar sheish by netilas neshama. Just like going into the base of Migdash, it has the Issa B'Yas in the Neshama. Av Kodesh Davar Sheish Ben Netilas Neshama. So too the Isra of Kochim must be Sheish Ben Netilas Neshama, V'ibin Ageya, and just because it says, if it's speaking Ben Ageya, Netilas Neshama Mikra, no one holds that what, that, so the Ella must be swat, Be'achila. It must be speaking Be'achila, because it says, because Kodesh Le'siga, it can't be that you get, if you make a Hekesh, can't be going to get Misa chorus for touching, it must be for eating. Vakatimi boile the Tommy Sheichel Basa Kodesh Lefnei Zrika. For the Gemara, I still need it for something else. That a person that's Tomei and he eats kashim before Zrika, Ditmar. Tommy Sheichel Basa Kodesh Lefnei Zrika, Rishlakasham Aleika, Rabbi Yachanam Ein Aleika, Rishlakasham Aleika Bechol Kodesh Leisiga. So I happen to use it again to teach me this of Achilas Kachim. Leishna Lefnei Zrika, Leishna Lachas Zrika. Rabbi Yachanam Ein Aleika, Kitani Bardala. Ask you Tumasu Tumasai. V'chik Sivahu, when they see the Tumasu Tumasai, that's not Dafka Lachas Zrika. But before speaking not. So if we have a kasha, if he needs it to teach me the din of what, of eating it before Zrika, where does he know that what? The stam is like by Nagia, and that it means achil, and kain lemakra b'kodesh, my b'chol kodesh, shmamina tarti. But kodesh, he learns two things, before Zrika and Isra of eating. Okay, everyone should have a great Shabbos.